Okay, so hello everyone. We're happy for you to join us. This is part two of the Student Race Equality Steering Group series of lectures for Black History Month, presented by Abu-Bakr Madden Al-Shabbaz. Abu-Bakr, for those of you who didn't attend last lecture, is a trained psychologist, sociologist, researcher, and anthropologist from Cardiff University School of Social Sciences, where he is also a visiting lecturer in education staff development. Abu Bakr is a well-established local historian and expert in Black and African history, in which he has been studying for some 46 years. Currently, he is also the Black History Officer for Race Council Cymru and their Black History Cymru 365 initiative and education institutions across Wales, as well as the education consultant for the Welsh Government's working group on the new Welsh curriculum in Black history and a multicultural education. Abu Bakr is also a special education tutor for Caerphilly County Borough Council, and he is also a counseling and guidance representative, and he teaches health and social care at the City of Bristol College. Abu Bakr is best known as a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary specialist. The first part of this lecture series that was presented last week was an introduction to African civilizations. It explored the science of history in relation to Black and African people. The first lecture has now been recorded and is available on Cardiff University's YouTube channel. This lecture will also be recorded and made available at a later date. Today's lecture will be discussing part two, Contributionism, the history of high cultures and civilizations in African antiquity. And now over to you, Abu Bakr.
Okay, thank you, Arwa, and thanks everybody for turning up this afternoon or for this evening's session. So like Arwa said, last week we looked at just a basic introduction to African civilizations. And what my focus was last week was looking at how Eurocentrism as a philosophy or as an ideology or as an approach basically was created in order to destroy the image of black-skinned people or dark-skinned people. This is those people who live in Africa and those in the diaspora, such as the Western world, such as America and the Caribbean islands. And the whole point of that destruction was to ensure that the defamation of Black people would persist. In other words, because they had fallen so low, as a result of slavery, the whole point really and truly was to maintain them within that position. And that was really the design, basically, for that element of defamation. So what I'm going to kick off with these slides. We've got quite a bit to get through. So last week, like I said, we looked at the differences with what you call it now, the different approaches. Now, the different approaches which you see, which is looking at catastrophic, contributionism, and survivalist, was based upon the theory or the approach that Orlando Patterson said that when Black history is taught or understood or delivered or presented within the Western world, it's usually through these three mediums. But the ones which is usually focused on are the catastrophic and the survivalist. And basically the catastrophic is looking at how Africa has gone through demise with different types of invasions, etc., where they end up losing to a large extent their culture, their land, their resources. And the survivalist approach is looking at the diasporan Africans, basically those Africans that were taken to the Western world, such as the Americas. This also includes the Caribbean islands, as well as Europe, and how they were treated and what kind of resistance they had to put forth in order to discontinue such a barbaric system. And contributionism is really and truly it really came out during the 1960s, during the civil rights movement and the Black academies or the white academies where Black history was not really being taught. And what the focus was, because Europeans, unfortunately, have this fascination of slavery. If you look at many movies or films, whenever they look at the ancient past, they always have Black people as slaves. And our history does not start in slavery. And what the Afrocentric movement and most Black people are focused on is looking at the contributionism, look at the high element of culture, what they had accomplished, what they've achieved, and what they continue doing even during and after slavery. So let's just go to David Hume. because this is how it really starts. So black people are enslaved, and this is what David Hume said. It was from the Scottish Enlightenment. This is what I started off with last week. So this is just to lay the foundation of some of the principles I started last week and what we're going to discuss. He said there never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even an individual eminent of either in action or speculation, in their behavior or in their thought pattern. No ingenious manufacturers, among them, no art, no science. What he's basically saying here is that black people are the people of nothing. Now, I don't know whether he actually visited Africa himself or whether he's one of those Enlightenment individuals who's just an armchair critic, listening to gossip and conjecture which was coming out of the colonial world and building his so-called theory or his pseudo-scientific theory on those principles. And then you've got the likes of Arnold Toynbee, who's one of the leading historians in Britain. He says the black race is not held to create any civilization whatsoever. And this comes out of his voluminous book. Can't remember if it's 20 volumes, but in there, he looks at all the different civilizations. He looks at 21 different civilizations, and he doesn't attribute none of them to dark-skinned people. So this is quite strange. So here is just looking at the falsification in which Eurocentrics themselves had constructed. So as you can see there are many, many high cultures or civilizations in Africa. And this is just a few. This is just a few. So the one which causes more contention is classical Egypt, because what has taken place, obviously, when Napoleon went in the late 1790s, what started happening was that they started to write black people out, even though it was clear that the ancient Egyptians were African people, because they had fallen so much so in the Western world into bondage, into slavery, into chattel slavery. What started happening was they decided to rewrite history. And then if you look at Kush, because the people there in Kush, which is now modern day Sudan, some parts of Ethiopia, because the people are still dark skinned there, there's not much contention. But even downplay the role that Kush actually has. Because we know when we study ancient Egypt, one of the things we know that the fusion of Egyptian classical culture comes from the south. We know this, it comes literally from the south. So it came out of places like Kush, Ethiopia. They preceded ancient Egypt. So Egypt as a civilization became a pooling of all those different nations. So Asa Ilyad, who's a chematologist. A chematologist is someone who studies classical ancient Egyptian society when it was called Kemet. Ancient Egypt was called Egypt by the Greeks, approximately 332 BCE. Before that, it was called Kemet. Kemet means the black lands. And as I said last week, it does not mean what Egyptologists are saying, meaning black soil. Because when you look around the world, of the classical world, the people always call their country after themselves. But because they don't want to acknowledge for the fact that the ancient Egyptians were dark-skinned people, they were Africans, they want to say they're talking about soil. But what sense does that make if you're talking about the soil? They were talking about themselves. And I showed you in hieroglyphics where there was two pieces of coal, black coal, and a person underneath, which actually show they're talking about a black person. Okay, so they're talking about themselves as a dark-skinned people, which is not a derogatory understanding or term at the time. I also talked about Ethiopia. The word Ethiopia actually comes out of the Greek word, which means dark-faced, burnt-faced, or charred-faced people, which is not a pejorative. It was just the Greeks were lighter-skinned people, and they were just commenting on the people who came out of Africa. And the Ethiopian didn't mean the people live in Ethiopia today. It meant people, along the Red Sea. It even included Egyptians, or the ancient Egyptians, as well as the ancient Nubians or Sudanese. So this is something I think we need to understand. We also talked about how Eurocentrism as a philosophy had gone through three major phases. So the first phase is where they started to lie about Black history or the Black past, which is known as unsophisticated falsification. Then they went to the second phase, which is integrated modification. They started to integrate into their academies all those different types of lies and falsehoods in order to reinforce the negativity that Black people were the people of nothing. And then the last one was conceptual incarceration. And what conceptual incarceration is when different groups of people are locked into that way of thinking. And this is why you have the likes of, hold on a sec, I just need to put my charger in. There we are, apologies for that. So when we look at a conceptual incarceration, it's basically where people are locked into a particular way of thinking, the lie and that modification. This is what this is about. So Asa Elliott said that when Black history is basically taught, when Black history is taught within the Western frame of thinking, it's through these 5 approaches that are used, which is to destroy. If they couldn't destroy, they were there to distort, they're either there to suppress information, falsify information in order to intentionally confuse. And that is really what's come out during the enslavement period. So let's have a look now at the destruction of African literature, knowledge, and educational institutions. And I think this is important because what you're going to see in this particular section, where the huge amount of voluminous books or libraries within the African continent was literally destroyed during the Greco-Roman period. There was other destructions that came before with the Persians and the Assyrians that came into Africa. But this is where the majority of the destruction took place. And the unfortunate thing is when we're looking at primary sources or looking at Africa, we unfortunately have to rely on the Greek and the Roman texts because they were destroyed during their occupation or during their time. So all the primary sources which ancient Africans had written had either been put to flames or it was thrown into the Nile or it was literally destroyed. You know, those things were written on steles or bricks or walls. So here is the ancient Phoenicians. Now, what you'll find is that I'm looking at the ancient Phoenicians because these people had traveled the world. They even came to Britain to mine tin. This is important here. And this is how they looked. Now, it's important for me to show these images because what has taken place through time and space is that Europeans, along with other people who have come later on, who've gone to these European academies, have literally whitewashed the images and asking people out of history. And this is a deliberate attempt to falsify, to distort, to suppress, or to intentionally confuse. So the founder of Carthage is in North Africa. And what happened was, her name was Elisa or Didi or Dido. She was a queen. The Assyrians were coming in from Nineveh, which is northern Iraq. They were coming into the place of Syrian Lebanon, and they were disturbing the social order. So she decided to go to one of the colonies, okay, and set up literally her new shop, in a sense. In other words, a new place where they would end up trading and a new place wherein they can live in peace away from the Assyrians. And this was approximately 1814, and this was in Tunisia. So he's a descendant, Hannibal Barca of Carthage, okay, is a descendant of this princess that came out of Lebanon, okay? We know about Hannibal. His military strategy is the most taught in the world. Now, the person on the right-hand side was a Black actor they used approximately 4 or 5 years ago in a documentary to display or to present this individual, because Hannibal was an African. What has happened, unfortunately, through the last couple thousand years is that the image of Hannibal has been literally whitewashed. So all these images we see of this so-called Hannibal Barca is a falsification because the Romans themselves called Hannibal Haffa, which is short for an African. So here, if you look here, these are the coins. This coin was minted, is believed to be minted just after the Battle of Tresmene in Italy. We know about him taking his elephants to the Romans during the Second Punic Wars. So as you can see, this is the actual coin of Hannibal himself with his elephant, which is known as Surus. There's supposed to be an inscription on there which says Surus, and this is Hannibal. So you can see from the image here that this is an African individual. Okay, you can see the thick lips, you can see the nose, you can see the hair. This is how the North Africans had looked at that time. And the Phoenician people had mixed with the indigenous North Africans, who we now call Berbers. The Black Berbers, not the white Berbers, the indigenous people who do not appear on postcards when they're dealing with tourism. It's the later people who they like to deal with in North Africa. So this is Hannibal. And if you read many books will tell you that the skulls which they found in many of the Punic cemeteries in places like Tunisia, in places like Libya, and places like Algeria and Morocco, they actually show that their skulls are so-called dolichocephalic, which means they're elongated skulls. They got projected jaws, prognathism, and they got platyrrhini, which means wide nostrils. This is clearly an African, and the people of that region were African. So what we're trying to emphasize is the importance of knowing history for what it was back at the time. Obviously, history has been whitewashed over the years. So the element here is to show that this man's military strategy, because he defeated the Romans in the Battle of Lake Trasmene, Trivia, and obviously Cannae. Cannae is when the Romans had sent the largest amount of soldiers into the field and he was outnumbered. And he used a military strategy to outnumber them. Within Hannibal's army itself, which is important here, he had Celtic people under his, under his leadership. He was the leader. So they were taking orders from him. So you got a black person who's a general fighting Romans in the Second Punic Wars, who have an amalgamation of people from different armies. You have Baltic people from the Iberian Peninsula. So his army is made of different people, even Germanic tribes, as well as the Libyan forces, and obviously Numidians, which came from places like Mauritania, Morocco, and Algeria. So there's an amalgamation of people who was fighting in his army. And unfortunately, because he was let down by the Senate in Carthage, the Romans came, used a similar military strategy he used. This is how they ended up destroying Hannibal and the Carthaginian Empire. So the Romans comes in approximately 146 BC, burns the library of Carthage. Over 500,000 volumes are put to flames. And this is when Rome takes over that region now. Okay, so Rome now is at the gates of Egypt. This is long before Cleopatra. Long before Cleopatra. So this is important for us to put things in chronological order and know where the Romans themselves were. The Romans were at the gate of Egypt. This is way before Cleopatra. So 500,000 volumes are put to flames. Then the Library of Alexandria is burnt under Caesar, okay, in 48 BCE. They were able to retrieve some of those documentations because when they went further south, in places like Nubia, places like what we now call Ethiopia, Eritrea, which they had copies of many of the books which were stored in the Library of Alexandria, they were able to reclaim some of that work back, but some of those works were literally put to flames. Then again, the Library of Alexandria was actually literally destroyed by Theodosius. Theodosius actually comes in and in Philae, and he literally sacks all the books. Now, this is where the theological works are now going to go into Constantinople for them to construct the Bible. So it's clear that the oldest records of the biblical text actually comes out to the African continent itself. So when we look at the Carthaginians, for instance, they actually spoke Hebrew. Okay, so that was a language that the Phoenicians had taken from Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine when they settled in the new town, which is known as Carthage, and they developed their empire on the North African coast. So what you're seeing here, you're seeing looting, you're seeing burning of literature. And now, a lot of those primary sources that goes back thousands and thousands of years, giving us information about thousands and thousands of years, okay, are no longer there. And this is the unfortunate thing about Black history, unfortunately. So it's not just a destruction of a people, it's a destruction of their literature, their libraries, their academic or educational institutions. So let's have a look at history and let's have a look at the African continent in antiquity. This is the oldest thing that we have, which is in the Bible. And this is where they said that the people originated from. We know that from DNA analysis, is that the oldest people to walk the planet were dark-skinned people or African people. And according to the genealogy as well, we get a similar thing. So here I'm going to look at the sons of Ham. Those of you know, looking at the, Ham is one of the sons of Noah, and he's supposed to be the father of the black race. So he has 4 sons, Misraim, which is Misr, which is Egypt today. Okay, so there's no mistake who the Egyptians were at that time. Okay, you got Put or Punt, Some say it's Lebanon, some say it's Libya, others say it's Somalia, Somaliland. Then you got the likes of Kush, okay? So this is like Sudan, and this goes down to Ethiopia. This is all the Red Sea area when you're talking about, what you call it now, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, Somaliland, all that's considered Kush. Kush is also considered to be in the Arabian Peninsula, and Kush is also considered to be where Mesopotamia is today, which is Iraq, okay, which we get the Sumerian civilization. So the first king, according to the religious traditions of the Hebrews, Christians, and the Muslims, was supposed to be Namrud or Nimrod, okay? So there you can see Babel, Tower of Babel. So you can see all these names, Akkad for the Akkadians. So we know who the original, okay, we know who the original Sumerians are, people of Mesopotamia are. This is really clear to us. So why is it that when they're looking at Sumerian culture, we always hear we don't know which language they spoke and we don't know what the people look like? This is distortion. This is to intentionally confuse. Okay, so let me move. So here is just a map showing you of the distribution of these groups. So there is got Put or Punt, which is in Libya. Okay, these lines were drawn during the Berlin Conference, so you need to forget about these lines. When the Europeans got together, you know, to divide up Africa and to take particular lands for themselves, this is how these lines were drawn in. So these lines don't exist, so take away these lines. Okay, so Misrayam or Misr, which is Egypt. Kush, look how large Kush is. It goes almost into Kenya, from Sudan, from Upper Egypt, all the way into Sudan, Somaliland, Djibouti, Eritrea. You also have Kush in Arabia, and you also have Kush in, which would be Sumeria, or modern-day Iraq, or where the Tigris and the Euphrates run. So sometimes when you read Kush in the Bible, it's not always in Africa. Sometimes it's in Arabia, other times it's in what is now what Greeks called Mesopotamia. So here is looking at the genealogy again. So this is just to reinforce, you can see yourself. But what you find here is that there's Babel, so we know that's the sun. Okay, there, okay, Nimrud or Nimrod. Okay, this is Mesopotamia. We have Persian Gulf, so we've got the dark-skinned people here, and there's all the purple here are showing you all the different descendants. But the descendants outside of Africa are from the Cushitic branch, and there's Kush there. So the Cushitic branch left, you know, to conquer or to settle in other places. But what I want to bring your mind to here is if you look at Babel here, you're looking at things going back into Africa. So what happens is they say that Sumeria is where civilization first begins. And what happens is the fathers or the progenitors of the African race, you know, the Indo-Europeans, as well as the Semitic groups, start off in Mesopotamia and then diffuse into other regions. This is what they say. But we know that archaeological evidence, as well as genetic evidence, tells us it's another route. So let's have a look at some of these routes now. So this is Martin Bernal, Black Athena. It's a 3-volume book. He was going to call it African Athena, but a publisher said that the book would sell. So what he began to realize when he was looking at classical Greek and Roman civilization, he started to acknowledge and notice how the roots of high cultural elements amongst the Greco-Romans was founded within the continent of Africa itself. This is why you call it Black Athena, because Athena, okay, or Athens, was founded by Amenemhet. I think it's Amenemhet III. Black skin, his nose is broken out, okay, he has dreadlocks. It's clear who he is. I don't have an image of Amenemhet on here, but this is what happens. So what happens is people from out of Africa went to settle in places like Greece. We know the first civilization, what they say is Greece. We know that the Minoan Cretes was the oldest civilization. But because they're still dark skinned, etc., and they come out of the Punt people, which is based in Libya, and they then settled in thing, we know they're not part of the Indo-European family. And this is why they're dismissed, and they go straight to the Greek era, and then later the Roman. The Etruscans were a mix of people, many of them were dark-skinned themselves. But what I want to show you here is to look at how the Semitic groups diffuse, or what they call the Afro-Asiatics. So here, you can see Central Cushitic, Eastern Cushitic, Southern Cushitic. Then here, this is linguistic evidence now I'm showing you. So here you have where the Semitic branches leave East Africa to go into the Arabian Peninsula. And we also know that the Semitic language is amongst many of the Ethiopian people. So we know, say for instance, Amharic is part of the Semitic language family, along with Arabic, okay, and Hebrew. So there's a diffusion that takes place of these people, Africans leaving and migrating into the Arabian Peninsula. And eventually they ended up in Mesopotamia, whatever the case may be. So this is looking at the language. Now, what I want to bring your mind to is this link here. You've got where the so-called Egyptian, Berber, we're talking about the black Berbers, the original Berbers, the Berbers that Hannibal himself would have come from. Okay, this is what I'm trying to emphasize here. And then you've got the Chaldaic people, okay, which runs into Central Africa, into West Africa. But you can see that they're genetically linked here. A study which was done in Egypt about 3 years ago actually showed that only 70% of Egyptians, modern day Egyptians today, are Arab themselves. The vast majority of them, okay, was 68%, 68 to 69% of their genetic markers came from the Berbers. But you could see the link here. Even when they checked Ramses, DNA at Ramses, okay, Ramses II, they said that he was sub-Saharan. So we know who the people were. So you have genetic evidence unfolding the reality of the racial composition of the people back in antiquity. So this is what I'm trying to show. So I'm trying to show you all the different diffusions. Diffusions mean movement and settlement. That's what diffusion basically means. So this is looking at things from a linguistic perspective. So you can see that the language, so when likes of Sheikh Anta Diop started to see that the Senegalese language, okay, was very, very close to Egyptian language, then we have no arguments here. We have no arguments here. It's not part of the Semitic language family. So the linguistic evidence actually show what the people spoke, and they would have had close affinity with the people next door to them. This is another diffusion. This is a foot diffusion. So we're looking at the out of Africa theory, which is probably more or less a fact now. So you've got the dark-skinned people leaving Africa, the Africans, going into the Arabian Peninsula, many of them settling in southwestern Arabia, okay? And then obviously you have the people of Sumeria, the Persian Gulf. Archaeologists will know that this is called the Nubian complex. There's been a lot of digs in the last, well, since the 1920s, in actual fact, there's been a lot of digs in this particular region here. And a lot of it points of out of Africa fact, that the skeletal remains, the craniological measurements are almost identical to the Cushitic people themselves. So what archaeology is telling us is what the biblical text is telling us and what people of the ancient times knew about genealogy. So there's no mistake of who the people were in this particular region in antiquity. So this is important. So you can see that diffusion, that movement into these places here. But all these regions here, those you archaeologists, is called the Nubian complex. That's what they call the Nubian complex, because they found Nubian remains that date back as much as 20 to 30,000 years in these particular regions. And this is just another thing. This comes out of Alice Roberts' book, The Great Human Journey, I think it's called, if my memory serves me right. And this is showing you the genetic footprint out of Africa. So I'm giving you the linguistic evidence, I'm giving you the archaeological evidence, and I'm giving you the genetic evidence. So you've got three different sciences saying the same thing. And this is unfortunate what we have to do. Whenever Black people or Africans have to put a claim, we have to use a multi-discipline of science just to prove our fact, because one science won't do it. So we've proved that the Egyptian language is from the African language family, same as the Berber language and the Chaldaic language, and you saw that connection. So the fact is, this is what we have to do in order to prove our points. So here is just another looking at Southern Arabia. These were the earliest empires: the Menians, the Sabians, and the Himyarites. Okay, you're talking about which they would now call themselves Arabs. Okay, but we're still dealing with the dark-skinned people at this time. They were known as the Al-Arab Al-Ariba, the true or the pure Arab, not the Musta-Ariba, which comes later, or a mixture. Were descendants of Hagar and Ismail, yeah, who married the Prophet, peace be unto him, Abraham. Okay, with a lot of Indo-Europeans coming down this region and mixing. Okay, they started mixing, especially up the north. Okay, this is really important for us to know. So we need to look at movement, diffusion, and seeing how the racial composition changes. Because what a lot of modern historians do, they look at the people who live there today and say they're the people there yesterday, but this is not true. This is not true. The people who are in these countries today are a result of diffusion. A movement who settled in those countries maybe hundreds of years ago, or even a few thousand years ago, only a few thousand years ago. So these are just telling you, looking at the early empires, which are Arabo-Cushitic, you could say, you know, or they sometimes call them Afro-Asiatic. They sometimes refer to them as Afro-Semitic groups. This is what we're dealing with. This is what we're dealing with. Okay, so there's Ad. Okay, there was a massive empire in Oman. So this is next to Yemen. But this, for you archaeologists out there, this is what they call, or this region, yeah, the Nubian complex. And they have found bones that go back thousands of years. They believe that when Africans left Africa to settle in Arabia, they left there, they migrated or diffused into the Arabian Peninsula approximately 140,000 to 134,000 years ago. The Aboriginal people was amongst that group of people, which ended up beachcombing. They went to Iraq, Iran, beachcombed down till they got into Australia. And that's when they believed that the landmass was locked together. So they didn't use boats or anything to migrate to get to these places. That's one hypothesis or one theory. But what I'm showing you, the close relationship that Africa is going to have with the Arabian Peninsula in antiquity, and obviously the relationship we would have had with Sumer, Iran, Persian Empire. So you can see that element of diffusion, that sophistication coming out of that region, okay, developing other peoples, other lands. They would have had some linguistic affinity or connection in some way. So let's have a look at Cushitic Arabia. So, according to Dr. Bertram Thomas, who's not necessarily a friend of dark-skinned people, he actually saw them to be primitive. But he did a lot of excavations in the Arabian Peninsula about the 1920s. This is what he says. Thousands of inscriptions have been collected in Southwest Arabia. They are in the character which resembles Ethiopic, which we should call Cushitic, and is not related to the Arabic character, which is the modern day character, which indeed it antedates by 1,000 years. So what you have Cushitic people with a script, thousands of years before the Arabic script comes into being, which really comes into being around about the AD period, the AD period. So the reality, we're talking about the BC period. So this is evidence to show you that ancient Africans who settled in Arabia over 130,000 years ago, okay, had a writing script, okay, and they documented their existence in that particular region, yeah, long before the modern script comes into being. And this is what Bertram Thomas himself says. Then he goes on to say, because of the archaeological evidence that took place in the 1920s, that the original inhabitants of Arabia were not the familiar Arabs of our own time, which means that the Arabs of today are a mixture. They're a mixture of Persians. Okay, this is where they get their light skin from. They're a mixture of Romans, a mixture of Greeks, Slavic people. Okay, this is where Germanic people. This is where they get the mixture of French and British and Spanish and Portuguese. This is where they get the mixture from. And the Aryans that came in, not just the Aryans that came into Iran, but the other Aryans that went into, who migrated into what is now known as Pakistan, the lighter skinned people. And obviously, when we look at Afghanistan as well, that's where the mixture of those people. So we have to know that the people who live there today are a diffusion. They moved in, mixed with the dark-skinned people, and became lighter over time. Okay, and what has happened, unfortunately, a lot of falsification has taken place, even though archaeological is going against some of the documentation which is being produced in these regions, because that is where civilization first began, in those particular, in the southern belts of the equator. So Bertram Thomas, this is a book which is known, which we call The Arabs. You know, I give you the page number. Okay, this was published in 1937. But what I'll say to you now, if you to get this book today, and I've seen this book which is written today, was published, I think, about maybe 10, 15 years ago. These quotations have been taken out. This is falsification. Okay, so they're still doing the falsification. They're still there to intentionally confuse. Why is it that Black people can only be associated with slavery and not high culture? And this is what's happened. This is a complete fabrication. These quotations are no longer in there. They've been omitted from the text. And this is what scholars like myself and other people have to contend with all the time. We have to read and study and evaluate and analyze and critique. And then when we look at newer versions, we start to see where it gets omitted. As soon as we start giving classes or giving presentations, and it goes back to people who are unfamiliar with that information because they like the negative dogma about dark-skinned people, etc. They're the ones who are literally responsible for changing this Eurocentric approach of changing things because it doesn't suit their modern thinking. It's just totally outrageous. So this is just evidence to show you how sophisticated or advanced dark-skinned people were in antiquity. They may not be the case now. You know, the world power at the time were dark-skinned people in antiquity. Now they're not. There's always rise and fall of people, rise and fall, rise and fall. And what happens between rise and fall is miscegenation. That means exogamy, where people marry from different racial groups, and then miscegenation, whereby they have mixed breed children. We then take over the identity of that country, even though they're mixed. And that is what's happened in that particular region. So if you look at Syria, for instance, they're mainly from Turkish group. They're Turkish people, even though they speak Arabic, they're Turkish in descent, you know. That's where they descended from. And genetics is saying it. So you find, you know, genetics or DNA as not being the best sport for many, many people. They've lived on the myth for a long time, and DNA is telling them something totally different. So this is just a picture again. So this is to show you the Cushitic brands of people. This is to show you the Cushitic brands of people and how they diffused and developed. So how did the Cushitic people develop? They're the Canaanites, okay, which are known as the Phoenicians, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. So that's where they had settled. The Egyptians, okay, Punt. They say Punt is in this region here as well. So there must have been a diffusion, but they seem to focus on there. But what makes a culture high? There are a couple of things that you need. The first thing that you need to have metallurgical skills. And what archaeological evidence has shown in this particular region, that the Africans seem to move from Stone Age straight into the Iron Age. They seem to have bypassed the Bronze Age. So this is quite unique. And there are some places in Europe, I think Finland is one of those countries that went straight from the Stone Age right into iron. They passed the Bronze Age. So that's the first thing, is metallurgical skills. Brick skills in building. This is another thing that creates high culture. The other thing is having an intelligentsia. An intelligentsia has to be made up of priests, doctors, and scientists. And when we're talking about that, we're not just looking at the medical field and looking at botany and looking at plants and food and health and those type of things. We're also looking at literature, engineering. We're looking at the mapping of the stars, yeah, the constellations. You know, so observatories have to be built in order to make those calculations that exist in our society today. So that is what creates high culture. And the high culture, the first cultures, according to this and according to archaeological evidence, is showing you that they're dark-skinned people or African people. And this is important for us to realize or to acknowledge. So here is just reaffirming in several instances in the Bible, using the Bible as a source. However, Kush seems to refer to a location not in Africa. And I showed you where the two locations are. Here in Arabia and in Mesopotamia, which is Iraq. So we know who the ancient Sumerians were. We know who they were. So there's no need for Sumerian scholars to say, well, we don't know, we're not too sure. Even when they dig up and they look at the skulls, they never want to tell us what the skulls are, what the shape of the skulls are, the osteological measurements, to associate it with a out of Africa theory, which is now considered a fact. Let's have a look, okay? Who are the people of Sumer and the Sumerians? While Sumer's many cultural achievements are much celebrated, the important question of an ethnic composition is frequently glossed over or left out of discussion altogether. This is what Runoko Rashidi says. Runoko Rashidi is an African-American scholar, and this is another problem. For some reason, when we're dealing with Black history, okay, especially amongst Europeans, many of them will not read a book written by a Black person. They will not read a book about the African continent written by an African. So this is the problem that we see now. Not only those libraries, these educational institutions had been destroyed. The fact is they don't even trust us about our information, about ourselves and our past. That's where society, this is how society has fallen literally, you know? And I've met many students who will not read, and I know many students who will read about Africa, but if you ask them, did you read that book written by an African? 9 out of the 10 will tell you no. And I bet most of you here who've heard most of this stuff, the reason why you're shocked, because you've never, you know, I've showed you white scholars which is written about this, but a lot of those things have been admitted. And when Black scholars are writing about this, their words are not to be trusted because they're there to try to make themselves feel good about who they are, whatever the case may be. So the reality is that we need to look further into the works by people. Let's read the history of the people by themselves. You know, I know most of you, if a dark-skinned person, a Black person decided to write a book on the Tudors, I bet the vast majority wouldn't even purchase it because you wouldn't think that it has any authenticity. Why is somebody from outside our continent writing about a period in our history? But that is what Europeans do. So the reality is that we've got to look at this, we've got to change the discourse, change our mindset, and we need to start reading books. Runoko Rashidi have looked at the African presence in China under the Shang dynasty. The Shang dynasty was an Afro-Asiatic dynasty. This has been proven through osteological evidence, also with DNA, even the cultural elements that are associated with the Ethiopic culture. So the information is out there. We just have to look. But because they're buried in books written by people who we're not supposed to trust, those works are being pushed to the side or denied. So Runoko Rashidi looks, he looks at the African presence in places like Papua New Guinea, Australia. His expertise is looking at the African presence in Asia, outside Africa. Okay, this is what is important here. These Sumerians are Ethiopians, so they use Sumerians and Ethiopians the same. Okay, Ethiopians means burnt face. Sumerians comes from the word Sumer, which means black heads. Just like Ethiopians, it means the same thing in the language. These Sumerians are Ethiopians, and their kindred appear to have settled along tracts of Mesopotamia to India. This is how far they stretch now. So when you look at the Black populations in India, you know that they come out of that cluster group that migrated to Mesopotamia and worked into South Asia. This is who they are. And then we know about Dravidian civilization. Dravidian civilization, yeah, comes after Sumerian civilization. So civilizations of high culture always have these connections, and people take that through diffusion, through language, or adopting those practices when they migrate and settle in other places. This area also includes southern Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Northwest India. So there was another form of a cluster group of Sumerians that didn't just settle in Mesopotamia, they spread all through that Persian Gulf and South Indian region. And you've got Sumer and Kish. Kish is supposed to be another concoction for Kush. There's the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan and parts of India. So the word Kush, I remember doing a class not so long ago, when I remember when I was saying Kush, the youngsters were laughing at me. So I'm thinking, well, what's so funny? When I asked, this is a name they give marijuana, cannabis, whatever the case may be. I didn't even know that. So the fact of the matter is, even the word Kush for the great people who built great civilization is now being associated with what? With hashish and cannabis or whatever the case may be, which is unfortunate, really unfortunate. Okay, the oldest civilization of the region was established by the Sumerians. They are designated in the Assyrio-Babylonian inscriptions as the Blackheads or Black-faced people. So I'm looking at the African presence or influence outside of Africa. John G. Jackson, who's an American, he's passed away now, but he's an American historian, and you'll find this information in his book called Introduction to African Civilizations. And this is where I got most of my literature from. When I read this book, it just blew my mind. I read this book when I was probably about 18 or 19. And this is probably my 6th copy because I read it so much. Pages were falling out, it broke, I lent it to people, didn't return back, etc. This is an excellent book. And he used a lot of European, you know, because a lot of people don't trust African or Black people when they deal with sources. But he quotes a lot of Europeans. So most people will find it pretty convincing because European people have said this. You know, so what he's doing, he is just giving you a summary based upon a lot of works that has come from Europeans who've done excavations or studied those particular regions where there's been an African presence outside Africa. Right, this is found in Saudi Arabia near the city of Medina, okay? And this is supposed to be the oldest head of the first people who settled, or the first person who settled there. Okay, you can see the broad nostrils, the thick lips. So we know who the original Arabs were. We know who the original inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula is. Okay, I'm not sure if this information is being suppressed, but the reality is that we do have an African presence. And with the fact is that among archaeological teams who are doing major digs within the Arabian Peninsula, as well as the Gulf states, one of the things is that is called the Nubian complex. Some they call it the Nubian belt, but it's called the Nubian complex because they found a close affinity between the Cushitic Nubians and those Cushites that settled in Arabia and the Persian Gulf. Okay, so this is just another image. So this is an image of showing you who the inhabitants were. This is the oldest image found. Then we got Arabia was ruled by queens for as long as anyone could remember. This is Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was one of the major Assyrian kings. On his exploits, he had maintained a large amount of control and built and was a contributing factor to the Assyrian Empire. He was probably one of the most, what you call it, diverse kings in a sense, you know, in order to push forward. And the thing is, what made the Assyrians powerful is that they used iron as part of their weaponry, as part of their weaponry, and that's what made them succeed. Now, Ashurbanipal is saying that Arabia is ruled by queens, and this is important here. So what the other link now is that Arabian society in antiquity was a matrilineal and a matriarchal system. This is what Assyrians are saying. This is around about between the 6th or 7th century BCE. This is what they are saying, and they would know, you know. So this is just trying to give you some understanding of the feminine principle that was known within that particular region. So let's have a look at the 3 aspects of this. I'll have another 5 minutes and we'll go and have a break. So look at the societal structure. So within the Arabian Peninsula, you'll find that the marriages were matrilocal. This is the same in Africa, in East Africa, amongst the Cushitic groups of people. So you've got cultural continuity now, cultural relatedness. What does it mean by matrilocal? Where the man moves into the locality of the woman or the wife, okay? And this is important because the thing about it is, when the Romans and Greeks went there, they found it quite strange that amongst the African people, they had a matriarchal and a matrilineal system. They found this quite strange because they were patriarchal And inheritance was through the father's lineage, and males inherited. It was different within African cultures and what was taking place in Arabia. However, it seemed to fall somewhat in Mesopotamia. For some reason, it seemed to fall. But we do know, if you study Dravidian civilization, which was where the Black Dravidians or Black Indians created their civilization, known as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Okay, what we noticed from there, they had a matrilineal system, a matrilocal system. Okay, for some reason in Mesopotamia, it didn't seem to sustain for some reason. So they may have been influenced by other groups of people that came from other cultural groups. Inheritance was matrilineal. That's another important factor. This was certainly the case in Africa. So I'm showing you the cultural relatedness with the people of Arabia. Obviously, I've looked at the people who lived in Dravidia, which was now Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, which is now in Pakistan and the Punjab region. Massive empire, huge empire. What they found there, created by these Black Indians, is totally amazing. And more study needs to be done on this. Okay, now in India and those regions, the dark-skinned people are they're known as pariahs. So they're basically at the bottom of the social ladder, but they themselves come and they remember through oral tradition what type of group of people they come from, to produce what they produced. And what they're doing over there is whitewashing it. They wait till the Aryans comes in. The Aryans only come in, white people only came in from Central Asia, round about 150 BCE, round about that time, probably even a bit earlier. Okay, so 1500 BCE is when they start to come down and they start to maintain a large bit of power and diffuse and settle in other areas. So these areas they eventually settle in places like Pakistan, they eventually settle in places like Afghanistan, Iran. Okay, this is a place, and then they slowly come into Mesopotamia. And this is where you start to see the lightning going to take place now, after thousands and thousands of years of interaction with different groups of people. So we've looked at the matrilocal, so we're looking at marriage, where the husband goes to live in the wife's property, okay? Inheritance is through the woman, so a woman could inherit, okay? Polyandry, and in that particular region, in the most African societies, women were polygamous, they can take multiple husbands. And the thing I want to say, the polyandry basically means when a woman takes multiple husbands. Polygyny is when a man takes multiple wives. But polygamy is when either a woman or a man takes multiple spouses. That's what polygamy is. So we need to know the terminologies. Right, what we'll do now, I think we'll have a break for about 10 minutes. And then I will come back, I will look at some of the queens, I will look at some of the culture groups in Africa, and we look at some of the high cultural elements, and we'll just marry all these things together. Thank you very much. Right, welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to go into the second session of trying to explore further, looking at the ancient history of Black people or African people. But what I'm going to focus on this one is looking at some of the female rulers, because this is what I'm trying to emphasize about the matrilineal or matriarchal system. Okay, so the Sabian Empire became an extension of Ethiopia. So what it's saying here, there's a link between East Africa and the Rim Peninsula, especially Southern Arabia, because that's where the links were for thousands and thousands of years before the AD period. Okay, so the Sabian Empire became an extension of Ethiopia and was ruled by a line of queens or kentakes. And I'm going to talk about the kentakes, called Candaces or Candaces by the Greeks. Kentakes is a name given to female rulers through the female lineage, female hierarchical structure. It basically translates as queen mother. That's what it translates as. Okay, so your position as a male in society, depending on your mother or the female that you came from. Before Islam arrived in the 7th century AD, Arabia was matriarchal, okay, for over 1,000 years of recorded history. And I just gave an example of Ashurbanipal making that recording. knowing through the oral traditions and the written traditions that took place in Mesopotamia or Nineveh, which is in northern Iraq, that they knew about it. Because this was quite strange. This was quite strange for many of those Semitic groups that was living in Mesopotamia, yeah, that women were ruling, because they didn't allow that at all. Women had a very limited role within their society. And this is what I say about the Sumerians. You'll find that the matrilineal system seems to become lost with the Sumerian civilization. Women became goddesses, etc. But generally the matriarchal system, matrilineal system didn't seem to exist. If it did, it played a very primitive role within that society. So let's look at the Queen of Sheba. And most of my works come from the Kebra Nagast. It was written in Ethiopia a few hundred years after the Queen of Sheba. It's called the Book of the Glory of the Kings. And so this is where I get my information from, okay? This was translated by Wallace Budge, who was an Egyptologist and a classicist of the latter part of the 1800s through to the early 20th century. So when we're looking at Queen of Sheba or Makeda or Bilqis, whatever word we decide to use, okay? She was born approximately 960 BCE. She was a fantastic administrator, which meant that she was educated. So women amongst the matrilineal system, it was seen part and parcel for her to be educated by her family. She was a great builder, and she was an international stateswoman. But the thing I want to say here, that even though she had a massive empire, she actually ruled from within inside Yemen. Her empire had stretched right up to Upper Egypt. Most of Djibouti, all of Djibouti, Ethiopia, Sudan, all that was her realm. Okay, parts of Kenya, Somalia, Somaliland, all that was part of her realm. And some of her realm actually went into the Persian Gulf. This is how powerful this woman was. Very powerful. So let's have a look here. The first queen of the Sabians to be acknowledged historically was identified as Bilqis in the Quran, okay, as Makeda in the Ethiopian Kebra Nagast, which I've just showed you here. This is the book, which I got most of it from, and the Queen of Sheba in the Christian Bible. So we're talking about the same woman. This is important. We're talking about the same woman. Now, the other thing I want to emphasize about this queen is that according to this book, she was actually born in Ethiopia, but because the realm, her father's realm and territory stretched into the Arabian Peninsula and most of the Persian Gulf, she was actually sent there, you know, literally to rule. I don't think she had any brothers or any male equivalent to her knowledge and her prestige. And that's how she became one of the earliest rulers in antiquity. The Sabian civilization flourished under Queen Makeda's reign, setting a standard by which other West Asian empires were measured. Okay, Makeda ruled her country with justice, fortitude, and wisdom for 50 years. Tradition has it that the land area she governed was quite extensive. The various lands ascribed to her empire included, and here it is, Upper Egypt, Ethiopia, parts of Arabia, Syria, Armenia, going into Europe, India, okay, and the whole region between the Mediterranean, etc. So this is actually showing how extensive this woman ruled. And we're going to see within African culture, especially in antiquity, how it was never really a problem to see a woman ruler. They were, you know, it really wasn't. That's not to say that it was hunky-dory, you know, let's get some facts here. Women did have to struggle, etc., but because it was a matrilineal system and a matriarchal system, there was a level of reverence that took place within many different African cultures within the African continent as far as what role a woman would play. The only culture which was not necessarily matriarchal, which I come across, there's only a few in the whole of Africa from a historical perspective, was the Zulu tribe in Southern Africa. Every other tribe, majority of every other tribe within Africa was a matrilineal system, you know, and then it became patrilineal, patriarchal, when other groups of people with that philosophy or ideal or idea came into the African continent. And that's when you started to see a change within that region. Okay, someone prepared an apartment built of crystal from the floor to the ceiling for her. and the transparent flooring ran a stream of water. So there was glass on top of water, which she would have to cross to come to him. So he was sat on the other side with this glass, transparent glass with water underneath. He had heard that one of her legs resembled that of a donkey and was as hairy. And this was to ruse to discover if it was true. And so this is the wisdom of Solomon now, according to what Joel Rogers is saying, okay? Joel Rogers is basically saying, according to the sources that came out of Ethiopia and what came out of the Levant region, that this is what Solomon was supposed to have done. In order, he was inquisitive about this foot of hers, which he's supposed to have had. And rather than asking her, he's basically using his wisdom by putting glass on the floor, because he knows by her walking over it, she'd have to lift up her dress. Okay, she lifted up her dress to avoid getting it wet. Then she discovered then that it was glass. The water was actually underneath the glass. Okay, Solomon was taken more by her beauty than her leg, which he forgot to look. So this is what they're trying to say, that Solomon basically ended up looking more at her beauty, but dazzled more by her beauty than her leg. So when she goes to Solomon now, this is what the Bible claims she's supposed to have said in the Songs of Solomon to the people around him, because Solomon was supposed to have approximately 300 wives and 700 concubines. This is what it says within the biblical text. And she's obviously gone there to see Solomon, just as wealthy as him, but she has a larger empire. Her empire is much larger, but Solomon was supposed to be even probably more richer than her. But she had a lot of links which going into India. Okay, so a lot of trade routes came into her realm, and where a lot of things were being traded. So that's how wealthy this woman was. Okay, so what she basically says, I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Okay, those women who are behind the curtains of Solomon, she's speaking to them. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun has scorched me. So what she's basically saying, she's actually identifying who she is, what she is, looking at the color of her skin, because the people around Solomon, most of those wives or concubines were lighter skinned, okay? But they probably were looking at her at the same time because she was supposed to be absolutely beautiful. And this is something which may be strange for some people to know, because we know how black females are seen in modern society, and that's been a result of the enslavement period. Okay, so I won't read through this, but all I want to show is how much power this woman had and what kind of things she was actually trading. Okay, so she had an immense amount of wealth, over 787 asses, mules, and camels, to carry this stuff to all the neighboring countries within her realm, which she was trading with, as far as India, the Persian Gulf, into East Africa, just across the Red Sea, right up to Upper Egypt. You know, even in the Levant, even when we look at Jordan and Palestine, Syria and Lebanon, this is the type of realm this woman controlled. Right, so we'll move on to the next section now. So last week I talked about these two individuals, Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophilo Benga. Okay, the argument about who the ancient Egyptians were was actually finalized in 1974, and it was actually recorded by UNESCO. Okay, UNESCO. You can download this off the internet, or you can purchase it, I think, on Amazon for £90. So if you want a cheaper version, you can actually download it for free. So it's actually got the debate. This is the first time where they decided to ask two black scholars from the African continent to come and speak about Africa. Okay, and what UNESCO basically says, that when they entered this debate with the heavyweights of Egyptologists in 1974, they said that these two men, between them, they shared approximately between 8 to 11 different disciplines between them. And they took on all these so-called Egyptologists around, who were the heavyweights at the time. And these two men had the best research papers and the most convincing evidence. And like I said last week, if you look on the right-hand side, these were the evidences to prove who the ancient Egyptians were. So we have no doubt who they were. Now, there were white ancient Egyptians, but they, during the Greco-Roman period, when Alexander comes in approximately 332 BC, because there's been many different invasions in Egypt. The first major invasion was approximately between 1720 to 1650 BCE by the Hyksos, known as the Shepherd Kings. They're basically dynasty, if my memory serves me right, 14, 15, and 16. And then by dynasty 17, they get kicked out from the people of Upper Egypt. Okay, so they resume power again. They kick the Hyksos out. And then the next major invasion comes with the Assyrians. After Ashurbanipal dies, another person who took over the leadership actually went into Egypt, in Lower Egypt, and takes over that country. That was around about 662 to 663 BC. Then under the Persians, Cambyses comes in around about 525 BC. And then the Greeks under Alexander comes in 332 BC. And then the Romans come in approximately about 30 BC. So you can actually start to see a lightening of the people. And the other thing which you'll notice is that there's hardly anything in ancient Kemet or Egypt where these interlopers or the invaders had left there as a contributing factor. So what I'm showing you here, these are the arguments that these two scholars brought to the symposium in 1974 to debate who the ancient Egyptians were. And this is what convinced UNESCO that they were right. They had the best papers, they researched it thorough, and they had the best arguments. Okay, and the main thing which really, really fascinated them was that Sheikh Anta Diop, who was an Egyptologist. Okay, Sheikh Anta Diop was an Egyptologist. He was the first Black Egyptologist. He had to write his PhD on 3 separate occasions because his professors in the University of Sorbonne did not accept his paper that the ancient Egyptians were Black. And he showed you through linguistic evidence. He was a linguist. He was a physicist. He was an anthropologist. Okay, and the list just goes on and on. Theophilo Benga is a linguist as well. He's one of the leading specialists in classical Greek and Latin. He speaks it fluently. Most people who speak Greek and Latin and read it don't read to the level that he reads. He reads the classical. He takes it back to the etymology. He's really good with his language. And he actually detected that when the Greeks are saying this and the Romans saying that, it means this at that particular time, not what it means today. And that was his argument. So I think this is important for us to acknowledge that as Black people, unfortunately, we have to use all these different sciences to prove our point, just to claim something which belongs to us naturally. And it's not about bragging, it's about acknowledging we are people of substance, we're the people that did something in the past, and that should be recognized, not written out, in order to intentionally confuse the people's audience. And that is what Eurocentrism is about. So this is just to give you an idea. Ancient Egyptians, you can see the hairstyle, you can see another Black Egyptian with a similar hairstyle, okay? So you've got cultural affinity, you've got cultural elements here, okay? Even though the nose is broken off on this particular statue on the left-hand side by this woman, you can still see her African features, okay? So these are just evidence, and I showed you who the people of Mizraim were. They diffuse this within inside Africa, and some of them do go into Palestine and mix with the Canaanite groups. And if you read the works of David Rowell, who's a biblical archaeologist, etc., he shows the relationship, especially with the likes of Tutankhamun and Akhenaten, writing to the people of Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, which is known as Canaan, who the Greeks called the Phoenicians, or Phoenicia. And then you got this thing, you got this design here showing you who the ancient Egyptians were. So let's have a look. If you look here, the ancient Egyptians, this is found on the tombs of Ramses III, okay, around about 1200 BC. The ancient Egyptians actually depict themselves as A, but they're identical to the rest of Africans. So they had no problem saying who they were. The B is the Indo-European type, and the D is the Semitic. These were the 3 main ethnic groups in antiquity. This is important to you, the 3 main ethnic groups of antiquity. So you can say that these were the sons of Ham, the sons of Shem, okay, sons of Shem, and Japheth, which is the Indo-European, okay? So let's have a look at how things begin. This is Nama, he's from Kush, which means he comes from either Ethiopia, today's Ethiopia, or Sudan. He goes with a mighty army round about 3500 BC, and he's the first one to unite Upper and Lower Egypt. Okay, his name is Nama. They call him Menes, I think, in Greek. So this is the first major ruler. Okay, he doesn't live long after he unites the two lands. And then from there, Upper and Lower Egypt become integral parts of a nation state. And you can see on the side, you can see his features, it's clear, yeah, even though they haven't broken off the nose, etc. So this is what the ancient Kemites said. We came from the beginning of the Nile, where God's happy dwell at the foothills of the mountain of the moon. And that's where Kilimanjaro is today. So this is where they said they came from. So they came as far as Kenya, Uganda, etc., and migrated up. And it's very similar to when you look at the diffusion on the linguistic evidence I showed you earlier by the image which is taken by Martin Bennell. Okay, this is Imhotep. This was the multi-genius. And this is Zosa. He's the first one to build the step pyramids, the first step pyramids, okay? Zosa on the left here was the one who commissioned him. This man was the oldest physician in the world. Not Hippocrates, it was this individual here. He was a prime minister, he was an advisor, yeah? He was many, many different things, a multidisciplinary specialist. Okay, and this is what he created, the first step pyramid. Now, when you look at the Sphinx, which is known as Harimaket, because Sphinx is a Greek word, okay, means to strangle and to throttle, okay? It doesn't have any meaning in the Kemetic world. It's called Harimaket or Herumaket, God on the horizon, or Heru on the horizon. This is what it is called. And what they said, there's a book which is written by Edward Mikulski, I think his name is. He wrote a book before the pharaohs, I think, if my memory serves me right. And he says, from geological evidence, that the Harimaket, or what we call the Sphinx, is between 15 to 20,000 years old, which means that there was a civilization in this place, in Egypt, long before Menes even came to unite the two lands. So that's how old this place is. So that's what the Sphinx is. That's how old it is. A lot of them thought it was Kheperu and Khufu and all these other individuals, but we now know that it was much older. That was already there by the time the third dynasty, I think it's about the third dynasty upwards, started to, to diffuse. But the Sphinx was there long before the first dynasty, which was established by Menes, came into fruition. So let me just carry on here. This is supposed to be an image of Imhotep. This is supposed to be the mummy of Imhotep. Okay, you can see his dark skin, his bald head. You can look at him clear. So we have no problem of acknowledging this. While the population of Kemet was somewhat mixed ethnically and racially, even in the early kingdoms, it was Southern Black African leadership. It founded Kemet, governed it during this golden age. So this is what is important here, that the golden age of Kemet, not its decline, was usually run by dark-skinned people, Black people, okay? This is what's really important here. They had their own educational system in place. They had a legal system. They already mapped out the stars. They already had the understanding of the constellations, medicine, and the list just goes on and on and on. And now we understand why they want to whitewash it. Right, this is Taharqa. This is of the 25th dynasty now. And this is the last time that Africans are going to rule ancient Kemet. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see the empire, but it is much larger than that, because I've done some research and I've noticed that that he's mentioned in the annals of Spain and Portugal. His name was Toroko. And this person is also mentioned in the Bible. I think it's Kings, he's mentioned in the Bible, when he went in to help Azakiah fight the Assyrian onslaughts under Sennacherib. It's this person who's written about. He was a field marshal at the time. He defeated the Assyrians. And it was after this dynasty that the Assyrians comes in. Okay, so King Taharqa. So it was during the 25th dynasty that there was a restoration of ancient ways. You got Black people going into Kemet, Upper and Lower Egypt, and restoring temples, restoring philosophy, the languages. They're restoring the old ways of life. So there must have been a connection between these two groups of people. There had to have been a connection with the two groups of people, because the Assyrians didn't, you know, and the Greeks didn't, etc., because they were foreigners that came from another place. So they wouldn't have had those cultural elements in order to restore. Even though there was restoration period in the Greco-Roman culture, okay, that was more to restore old buildings or whatever the case may be. So around about that same time, when the Assyrians comes in, if you read the works by Ivan van Sertima, he started to notice when he wrote a book called They Came Before Columbus, Ivan van Sertima. You have these heads, these war helmets, okay, and they believed to be Nubian Cushites that came from the 25th dynasty. When the Assyrians came in, etc., they were pushed out to that particular region, and then they ended up for somewhat in the Americas. This is in like in Mexico and all these other places in Central America. Now, how do we get this date? There was this stone head, which was actually on a piece of wood, and they carbon dated the wood, and they said it's between 700 to 600 BCE. This is exactly the time of the Cushitic dynasty, who were controlling the 25th Cushitic dynasty of ancient Egypt. So there we have evidence, we got carbon dating evidence showing that these are the same people. This was found in the Smithsonian. This picture was in the Smithsonian lock. It was hidden away. And there was a person by the name of Wayne Chandler, who I'm going to be quoting later. He's an expert looking at the African presence outside Africa. And he actually saw it in the draw. But when they were showing the face all those years, the Smithsonian was saying, this is a baby face, it's not African, whatever the case may be. But what they wouldn't show was this part here, the 7 braids at the back, which is a sacred number amongst the Cushitic and the ancient Kemetic people. 7 was a sacred number. They would not show this. So this is what they were deliberately suppressing information. So what happens now, when Ivan van Sertima wrote this book, because Europeans are fascinated, the only cupboard they want to keep us in, unfortunately, is this 500-year room that we were slaves. They can't see above that, unfortunately. We're people of nothing. And this is what is unfortunate, that, you know, people like myself and people that came before me, we have to go into our history. We got to pull these things out. A lot of your institutions suppress this, okay? Oxford and Cambridge do exactly the same. Berkeley, Harvard, they do exactly the same, okay? They're all involved in this, and we know this. And we know this because a lot of good white people who are students who see these things, pull them out, okay? And write books on them. That's how they're being exposed. Because they're starting to say, wait a minute, why is this information out there? Why is this locked in drawers? And this is the thing. So a lot of white people who are studying, you know, with archaeology and history and all these other humanities programs in order to understand the ancient world, they are now bringing this information out to us. So it's not just Black people who find this information, white people who are disappointed that they've been lied to about Black history, African history, are now pulling these things out and putting this together. Okay, so this is the university complex. It was called Hatshepsut. And this came about approximately around the 11th dynasty of the Kemetic era. And this is approximately 2000 BCE. So this is our oldest university complex is. It housed over 80,000 students, not from Rome, not from Greece, because Rome and Greece didn't exist at that time. It came as far as Central Africa, as far as the Congo, Angola, those places, and as far as Southern Africa. How far into Southern Africa, we don't know. We don't know where it's Namibia. We don't know whether it's South Africa itself or Zimbabwe, but that's how far students came to come to this university complex. Because what we have to understand about Egypt is a child. It's the pooling. All those great mini civilizations that came before, it actually came in and pooled itself together, making Egypt the colossal of, you know, empires at that time. Okay, priests were scientists and scientists were priests. And this is something, they didn't separate religion from science, a church from state. This was not a concept amongst them, okay? They saw that everything could be learned. religious as well as secular sciences. And this is important for us to acknowledge, because they're able to deal with all different sciences at a particular time. Right? Children began their education at 7 years old. And the reason why they began this at 7 years old is because the ancient Kemites and the ancient Nubians believed that if a child played, okay, get that play out of them, they can now sit comfortably and relax and take in information. Okay, this is what they strongly believed. So they believed that development was in 3 stages, from 0 to 7, from 8 to 14, and from 15 to 21. This is what they believed. And I think it's Finland, if my memory serves me right, where they actually start children's education, 7 years old plus. Okay, so children should be versed in play for the first 7 years. They'll learn skills, they'll learn how to, accidents, they will learn different types of skills needed. So by the time they're ready to sit down and learn, they're able to develop a more sophisticated mindset. And these were basically these were the disciplines which were taught at the University of Ephesus. Okay, you had basic, you had intermediary, and you had advanced levels. This is how it came about. So you started your university, life after the age of 21. After the age of 21, not before. This is how serious they were. You had to master all these sciences. And what was very common within the University of Ephesus, so to most other institutions within Africa, is the fact of memorization, to retain as much information as possible, because they believed that the science of education, which is a subject, they call it discipline, which means that it should discipline you. That's why they call it a discipline. You learn behavior from within the subjects. That's how you learn your behavior, within the subjects, to appreciate what's happening around you and why things are happening the way that they are happening. So this is what education was about. It's about developing your mind, your body, your soul for your behavior. This is what it was all about. That's how it was understood. Not for money, not for the job. So there's a sacredness to education within the African principle of education. And this ran all the way down from Lower Egypt into Nubia, into Sudan, right down into the Red Sea area. You found that the educations were totally identical, of educating children. Girls would educate alongside boys because, like I said, a matrilineal system. Sometimes they had to take leadership roles, whatever the case may be, if prominent men within a community or in a society had died. Okay, Ephesus was like all other lesser temples in Kemet's Nile Valley. Every temple had a faculty and a library. And this is what is a sad thing about what took place during the Greco-Roman period. All those academic institutions or educational institutions or libraries were literally destroyed. So these were just some of the disciplines, okay, not subjects, disciplines that they would study. So the mystery system, mystery teacher of the heavens. So astrology, astronomy, okay? You got geography, so on and so forth. So all of these had to be mastered, at least. But if you wanted to specialize in something, you specialize in one side, but you had to master all these before you got your certificate of recognition. This is what's important about this. And what I want to emphasize here is the fact that they prize themselves on people understanding qualitative as well as quantitative information. So you had to master figures, you had to numbers, a number system, as well as written information. This is how this came about. Okay, it was both a center for religion and education. So religion and education came together, since the two could not be separated in the minds of the Kemites. It housed an elite faculty of priest professors. Okay, so there was no distinction, there was no separation between a scholar and a priest. You had to have a religious and a spiritual element along with secular sciences. That way you behave yourself when you're actually teaching these things, because you want people to go out into the community and to benefit the community. Not like what's happening with Harvard and Yale and Berkeley and all these universities, where a lot of the wealthiest families, they send their sons there to come out to commit embezzlement and all these other type of things, because they studied subjects. They didn't study disciplines. And this is why they run corruption and run havoc within a society. So education is about developing the mind, body, and soul. So you have good conduct, good behavior. This is how the ancients believed and understood, because they were trying to create a man and a woman to be responsible individuals for society. So if their irresponsibility actually caused them problems, they would then take accountability because they were a servant to the people. That's what a leader is. A leader is supposed to be a servant to the people. And this is what they were trying to inculcate. Then it goes on to say that they established over 80,000 students when it was at its height. So that's the most students frequented this university complex. So I'll leave it there, open up for question and answers. And I hope I'm able to answer all your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abu-Bakr, for such a fascinating lecture. We do have 2 questions here. So one that you've partially answered during the break. So one of our attendees is asking if there are any other books or historians that you would recommend to take a look at to learn more on this topic.
Okay. Yeah, Gerald Massey, I think he was a Scottish antiquarian, I think they call them. You know, these are people who study the classics, etc. His books are really good. And what he actually shows, he shows ancient African principles, religion, educational systems within the British Isles, amongst the Druid people. Okay, this is important, yeah. So there is some cultural links and influences that is taking place because culture diffuses, culture moves. Either people take it there or people see it somewhere else and then they borrow it, take it back and establish it in their country. So the Book of the Beginnings, part 1, there's a few volumes of this. So this is one, Gerald Massey, okay. Primitive African Paradise is another good book. So if you're looking at linguistics, you're looking at the Celtic languages and looking at the Indo-European connection with the ancient African world, these books are really, really good, okay. Other books, I talked about John G. Jackson's Introduction to African Civilization. Another great collection of books is Ivan Van Sertima's edited books. So you have these books here, Egypt, the Child of Africa, Egypt Revisited, okay? So he has some good scholars, black as well as white scholars, looking at the positive elements and contribution which are made by black people in Africa. Another book which I've used for the ancient Sumerians, etc., is done by Ronoka Rashidi and Ivan Van Sertima, is edited, which means there's other essays written by other scholars in there. It's called Ancient Presence, African Presence in Early Asia. So it looks at the black presence in places like China and India, in Mesopotamia, in Arabia. This is what I got my information from. Okay, and they look at that. They look at archaeological evidence as well as textual evidence, etc. And I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that answer, Abu-Bakr. We also have a question from, unfortunately, I can't see the names, so please do sign your names when you write your questions. But one attendee is asking about your thoughts on the decolonization, not only of academic institutions, but of religious institutions as well.
Yes, decolonization should take place within educational institutions. As far as religious institutions is concerned, it needs to happen in many different religions, because what religion is supposed to do, it's supposed to see everyone as equals. Unfortunately, through colonization and through imperialism, many of us have gone in from our own cultures with that negative mindset, demeaning groups of people who come from elsewhere. And this shouldn't happen, religion. No religion justifies this in any way or form whatsoever. So there needs to be a complete decolonization, because what imperialism and colonialism did, it put out a particular narrative, and those narratives permeated and proliferated in different types of institutions, from entertainment, from education, to the legal system, the political system, religious system, yeah? And the list just goes on and on. So even a labor market. So these are things that, so there needs to be a complete decolonization of all these institutions I've just mentioned in order to ensure that we have a much healthier and safer experience within our own society. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you for that answer, Abu-Bakr. And perhaps we can also look into the history of other educational institutes and cultures to help with that, as you've mentioned, with the discipline specifically. Now we do have another question.
Okay.
This person is asking, what do you think we should do to ensure our African history is no longer whitewashed, suppressed, or falsified?
Well, first thing which I believe is that we should study. One of the problems we have, is that we don't study things in depth and wanted to become custodians of that. The reason why I became a historian is because I noticed amongst my parents, say for instance, they knew more about British history, imperialism, and colonization than their own. And the thing about it is that when I was trying to study my own history, looking at the past and beyond slavery, there was this sense of antagonism taking place within the household. And what I started noticing was that as they were dying off, now they wanted to recapture their history. So I took it upon myself, literally, truly, really and truly, to go out and research as much as I can and to bring that information back in a way. But I didn't think I was ever going to become a lecturer or a teacher. I am started now to write books to get that information out there. But it's our responsibility. The preservation of culture is our responsibility. And we need to read and we need to write as much as possible and preserve that. Because those custodians that took over after the fall of the Moors in 1492, they've done a horrific job in whitewashing it, writing us out of history, where now we've become mere slaves in the eyes of the other. And it's unfortunate that has become the reality of our experience in the Western world, when our history goes back right from the beginning of time. So we need to do more. We need to create more scholars, historians, social scientists, okay, and push for that. And we need to implement that within our children. We have to make sure that at least one of our children is a historian, a chemist, a physicist, etc. Not what happens when I go into the schooling system, where majority of them are put up their hands, they want to engage in music, sports, and drama. This is what they want to engage in. And when you're looking at the higher sciences of STEM, either none or hardly any are thinking of going into that realm. And this is unfortunate. And the educational system perpetuates that to a large extent. So we have to do more, go into study circles or go into evening classes, do more online courses, build up a repertoire of information, and you go out and you teach it as an individual. And that's how it's going to spread. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abu-Bakr. Now we have a couple of questions from Chris. So one question is, does the evidence suggest Noah's family originally was from the Middle East or from North Africa? And also, you mentioned that Noah was the father of something, but he missed it. So if you could explain who that is, please.
Could you say the first part again, please?
Yes. So does the evidence suggest Noah's family originally was from the Middle East or from North Africa? And Noah was the father of whom?
Right. I didn't say that Noah was from the Middle East. Middle East is a social construct that came at the Sykes and Picot Agreement at the turn of the 20th century. So I never mentioned the Middle East. The Middle East doesn't really exist either. It's a combination of the old Ottoman Empire, where the British and the French literally tried to destroy, and then they called it the Middle East. So the Middle East doesn't really exist. So I don't know what it means by the Middle East, because they've taken some countries out of Africa, some countries from the Levant, others from the Persian Gulf and Arabia, and they call it the Middle East. Even Turkey falls in there sometimes. So I don't know what you mean by Middle East, because you're dealing with different landmass, and it doesn't make geographical sense either. Geographers will tell you this. But I didn't say that Noah came from the Middle East. or from Africa. What I said was that the children of Noah, Ham's children, had settled in those regions. That's what I said. They had settled in those regions. I didn't pinpoint where Noah actually lived, you know, at that time. I don't know, you know, where he lived, etc. All I know is that the documentation say that's where his children, grandchildren had settled. But where he came from, where he was actually living, I don't know. And most of the evidence out there, I'm not 100% convinced. So I hope I've answered that part of your question. The second part, if you can read the second part to me. Arwa, you there?
Yes, so Noah fathered which tribes, or which, you've mentioned that Noah was the father of someone.
Yeah, I mentioned that Noah was the father of Ham, Shem, and Japheth. So Ham was supposed to be the father of the so-called black race. Okay, Shem was supposed to be the father of the brown race, and then Japheth is supposed to be the father of the white race, or the Indo-Europeans. Okay, and that's how it's traced back, etc. But it doesn't mean, okay, that the three sons were that color. They were definitely dark skinned at that time, because we know through genetic and DNA that white people or lighter skin is a mutation from the darker skin. And that came during the period known as the Worm Interstadium. The Worm Interstadium was when we had the last major ice age up in the northern caps, where Africans were caught into that ice for approximately 15 to 20,000 years. They went through a depigmentation process because there was a lack of vitamin D because of the ultraviolet rays in the sun, etc. So they had to shed some of this melanin in order to survive in these colder climates. And this is what happened. This is why we all come from one family. And according to the archaeological evidence, those of you who know how to read skulls will know the difference between dolichocephalic, mesocephalic, and brachycephalic. And what they are short skulls, broad skulls, medium-sized skulls. And the thing is that when we look at most of the people in antiquity, they have dolichocephalic skulls. All the older skulls which are found in Europe, in all these places where there's Europeans or Indo-Europeans, it actually shows elongated skulls, African skulls. Europeans have what is known as mesocephalic skulls. It's medium size, it's slightly rounder, and it's much more thicker, because they needed that in order to survive, so their brains wouldn't freeze, according to scientists, in the cold weather, because the ice was, you know, was prevalent in that region. So that was the whole point of them having harder heads, okay, and slightly bigger-ish skulls. Not about superiority, inferiority. It was to survive under those climatic conditions. So I hope I've answered your question as far as that's concerned, but we're all from one family. It's one human family. The people in antiquity are split into different clans and tribes based upon language and based upon lineage. Now in most societies, like in the Western society, they've undone that now. We live as a nation, so we're not attributing ourselves to families unless you come from royalty or the aristocracy, okay? But we all come under a nation perspective. But there's still in many other places where tribe lineage, you know, clan lineage is vitally important, etc. And many of them can trace their lineage back to these particular groups that I mentioned earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abu-Bakr. I know we're approaching the end of our time, so how many questions can you take right now?
I can take as much as they want. Make up for last week.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good. So the next question is from Lucy Jenkins. Her question is, how do we reconcile the multiplicity and deeply, yet also beautiful, diverse composition of our past when the education system doesn't ask us to question or challenge anything mono? Monolingualism and monoculturalism is the norm, and whilst we try to move away from this, it's impossible whilst our key institutions reinforce mono in all areas. I see language and learning of languages as one vehicle for unpacking and unpicking the false narratives we accept. And she thanks you for a brilliant talk and would like to know your views on this.
Right. My approach, basically, I believe, and I've said this to the Senate, you know, I'm part of the working group on the new Welsh curriculum in order to integrate Black history into the curriculum. But I'm also in favor of a multicultural curriculum. And what I mean by a multicultural curriculum is that the multicultural curriculum is more realistic because we're going to send our children out into a global village or into a global world in which they themselves are going to see variety, diversity, and differences amongst people in languages, skin color, phenotype, whatever the case may be. And unfortunately, the educational system in Britain does not cater to that reality. It's been whitewashed. It's very much a Eurocentric approach. Okay, so the job is really to see that all the contributions made by different groups of people that live in the society are reflected throughout the curriculum. Because it's not fair for the Black child, as an example, to sit in the class. White people are mentioned in chemistry, they're mentioned in physics, okay? They're mentioned in mathematics, they're mentioned in biology, they're mentioned in literature, they're mentioned in language, they're mentioned in geography, they're mentioned in design and art, they're mentioned in every single subject you can think of, every single subject. And yet we're made to believe that that classroom is inclusive, totally inclusive. It omits Black children and brown children from those narratives within those subjects. And they get upset that we complain that we are not included in the syllabus. And how can you fit Black history into it? And my argument is, if you fit white history into all those disciplines, you can fit Black history in there, you can fit Semitic history in there, you can fit Indo-European history in there, you can do it. You don't want to do it because the reality is they believe in dominance and authority and hegemony. They don't believe in sharing. They don't believe in what I refer to as cultural elasticity. They believe they should dominate and control, not to share. And that is the problem with the monocultural approach within the curriculum. So the decolonization of that is inevitable. It needs to be done because Britain is a multicultural society. It's a multi-ethnic society. And just giving a curriculum to white children or white pupils within the educational system is totally unjust, it's not fair, it's not equal, it doesn't have equity, okay? And it doesn't involve inclusivity. That's not inclusivity, okay? Inclusivity means we're included alongside the group. So if I was to ask you, for instance, name me one Black scientist, most of you would struggle. A Black biologist or chemist or whatever the case may be, you would struggle. But you know Isaac Newton, okay? You know Copernicus. You know these individuals. But do you know there were people that preceded them in Moorish Spain and in Italy who were Arabs and Africans? We don't know about this because that 800-year to 1,000-year history has just literally been wiped out to the way. And all Copernicus and Galileo was doing, they were reading translations of works done by Muslims. This is a historical fact. This is a historical fact. So we need to work together, open eye. I'm still learning myself, yeah? So we need to work together to recognize this, recognize people's achievements, accomplishments, and contributions in the past, and make sure that those things are delivered effectively within every subject, not just history and geography, which they want. It needs to be done in chemistry, physics, biology, literature. It needs to be in art and design, and the list just goes on and on. So that's what I'd like to say, and I hope I've answered your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abu-Bakr. Now we do have two more questions, but relating to that question you've just answered, Rashida Adam is asking, are there Black history courses that now include the works of Black historians in the curriculum?
No, at the moment, by the looks of things, no. And this is another problem because like the person which asked about our responsibility, we're not producing enough authors, enough historians. This is what we have done. We haven't produced that. So the fact of the matter is we're relying on works by either Eurocentrics or Europeans to tell our story. I think it's time now with a curriculum change on what's been taking place in the last year or so, where people are more involved with the curriculum and understanding the direction the educational system should go. We should now start to contribute to that in some way. Many of us can write. Let's write a small pamphlet, on some sort of education, write it for, children books. We need to write children books as an example and help to promote that within the schools. We need to write books for teenagers, preschool, etc. So children can see their reflection in these books. So they know they can do something, and they know the authors come from their community. And that will instill in them some sort of self-worth. And this is something I think that, we really need to do in order to ensure that we get a fair curriculum. Because once the decolonization of the curriculum goes, then there's going to be other decolonization in other institutions. There has to be decolonization in the labor market, in the political arena, because we still live in a dual system. The legal system, even though the law says X, Y, and Z, it treats this ethnic group as a privileged group under the same law, and it harshly with this ethnic group. That is decolonizing the legal system. The political system as well is only favorable to the wealthy and the rich, and to the poor and the weak, they're at a disadvantage. So there's a lot of work for us to do. It's not just race, it's a lot of work in other things. So we all have to do our little bit, and that's all I'm saying. And the more we do, the better we feel. We can't leave our education of our children up to the schools. They've been failing our children for a long time, and they're still doing it now. And sometimes we're doing very little to ensure a compensatory and a supplementary education is being accessed from within our own homes for our children. Because many of us don't even want to create libraries in our homes. We believe that the school should have all the books. We should have all the DVDs and videos, these massive plasma screen televisions, and not a single book in the house for the children. We have to help socialize them and teach them, because there's going to be deficits in the educational system, and many sincere teachers can't do it for us. I'm sorry, and they can't do it all for you. So help the teachers to help your children. So thank you. I hope I've answered that question.
Okay, thank you so much, Abu-Bakr. I'm going back to the books you've mentioned and suggested for reading. One attendee is asking if they're good for beginners.
Right, good books for beginners. Introduction to African Civilization is a good book for beginners. I think this is the foundation, really and truly. It was difficult when I first read as a teenager, but because you've been introduced to some of the stuff today, you'll have a better understanding of this book now. So that's a good book for beginners. Another book, Ivan van Sertima's book, are pretty good for beginners as well. And there's another book, if you want to look at genealogies, which I talked about. His name is Rudolph Windsor, and is called From Babylon to Timbuktu. That's an easy read, and that will break down for the person who wants to know about Noah and Ham, Shem, and Japheth. That will give some context to that. Okay, so they'll look at genealogies of antiquity, and they'll also look at some of the historical recordings in which many of those ancient societies had engaged in. So he amalgamates all these disciplines in that book, From Babylon to Timbuktu. Rudolph Windsor. Yeah, Rudolph Windsor, his name is, yeah. Okay, so just a couple of books just to start yourself off. Those of you who come from other places now, like so-called Middle East, etc., get this book here, African Presence in Early Asia. Okay, that's a good book. Okay, so it looks at the African presence in Afghanistan, in Iran, Pakistan, India, China, okay, the Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula, okay? So that's good. So it's always good to start off where you're at, get the material around that, and then you can diffuse outwardly. So that's what I would leave you with. And the last one I would leave you with, which is good, is Ivan van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus, which shows the African presence in early America when they built the pyramids, because the pyramids are almost identical to the pyramids in Sudan, which you find in places like Mexico. And you got a lot of those massive heads structures or stone head structures of these Africans. And it actually looks at the voyage of that. It also looks at the voyage of Abu-Bakr II, who was from the Empire of Mali. And they found figureheads of Mandinkas, Muslims in America, and they've also found Mandinka and Arabic words amongst the native people in Central America and South America. So this actually shows that Africans so-called discovered the Americas 2 centuries before Columbus. So that's another book you can get into. But all I'm basically doing is getting you to move away from this slave narrative, because that's what it's all about. Let's move away from the slave narrative and let's begin the narrative elsewhere, because our history don't start in 1492. It begins before that period. Okay, so I hope I've answered your question about basic books that you can acquire and read and get a better understanding of the course that I've put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Abu-Bakr. Now we have the last question for today, which is about any information you have on West African educational structures. If you can elaborate on that, please.
Yeah, there is some books on West African educational structures. There was a book which was written, it's called Tarikh al-Sudan, or the history of the Sudan. That is what the Arabs had called West Africa. They call it Bilad al-Sudan. It is translated by John, what's his name? John Hornwick. John Hornwick is a translator of that book. But it's not called The History of the Sudan. It's called The History of Timbuktu and the University or something. That's a good book. That's a really good book. That looks at the scholastical work under Islam by these scholars. It looks at the empire of Mali, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. It also will tell you about the Songhai Empire, which gross national product, okay, was books, not gold and silver. It was books. People, and they believe, because everybody wanted to be a scholar in that empire, this is what caused the empire to fall. It wasn't gold and silver. The richest person in the empire was the person that made books. The next one was the one who wrote a book, etc. Okay, this is in West Africa. So that's a good book, okay, by, what's his name? I've forgotten what the author's original name is, but John Hornwick is a translator of that book. Okay, it's called Tarikh al-Sudan, which is the Arabic, okay, which means the history of the Sudan, meaning West Africa. Another book is by Felix Du Bois. It is called something to do with Timbuktu, the mysteries of Timbuktu, I think it's called. Felix Du Bois, he was a Frenchman who went to West Africa, saw remnants of the educational system in West Africa, and wrote about that. And the other good thing about it, another good book looking at the educational system of West Africa is a book which is called Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James. He wrote a book called Stolen Legacy, looking at Greek philosophy, and he shows the origins of the African philosophy in which the Greeks had borrowed and used and may have developed even further. He also talks about that in West African and North African cultures, okay, they were the inheritors, of ancient Kemetic wisdom and education. Because like I said, in the University of Ephesus, that they came as far as Central Africa to go there, they had gone back with that knowledge and taught their people. So by the time Islam comes in onto the scene, they add their contribution. Okay, because during the Islamic period, you find that they talk about the House of Wisdom, Greek philosophy, Indian philosophy. They rarely talk about African philosophy for some unknown reason, and that the ancient Kemetic thing was the one which went into Spain, went into North Africa, it went into Spain and Portugal during the Moorish expansion or rule for 800 years. That's where it comes off. So that's our contribution of West Africans, North Africans who are indigenous to that continent, what we brought to Spain in order to develop those 17 university complexes, which are still standing even till today. So I hope I've answered all your questions. Any other questions at all?
Thank you very much, Abu-Bakr. No, that's all we have for today. We're very much looking forward to next week's lecture, which is part 3, Catastrophic, the Fall of African Cultures and the Dispersing of its People into the New World. So please, everyone, join us for that lecture. We have 2 more lectures remaining till the end of the month. Thank you for all of those who have attended, and thank you to our Vice Chancellor, Colin Warden, for launching the Black History Lectures. And also thank you to the Student Race Equality Steering Group, specifically Isabella James and Jessica Donrod, for all their help and efforts in launching this and helping to organize. So thank you, everyone, and see you next week.